functions. So one really good example of this is fetching a record from the database. And like I said, we support 3 different databases, but there's about 5 different extensions you can use. So there's the MySQL extension, which was the initial one. Then with PHP 5.0 came the MySQL MySQL improved. And then there's the MS SQL, which was kind of the older community developed SQL Server driver that used free DDS or used the NTW DBlib library and everything. There's an Oracle one, which Oracle really puts a lot of effort into, having first-class support for. And then there's the SQL Server one, which is the one that Microsoft just came out with a year or 2 ago, which was improvingly getting better. So not only do all these functions, so these are the functions that if you're wanting to get a record from a database, so you've done your query and you're just trying to fetch the records, these are all the functions you use depending upon what database you're on. Now, not only do they all have different input parameters, like if you want to specify, I want it back in an associative array format or things like that. Some of them, the fetch associates, intrinsically say I wanted it back as an associative array. The other ones you have to pass in a parameter. So there's differences there. But here's like an interesting problem. What gets returned if no rows are available? And as you can see, they all kind of have a slightly different approach to the problem. The original MySQL returned a false. MySQLi returns a null. Some of the other ones return false. And the SQL Server is kind of schizophrenic. It will return a null unless there is an error, then it's a false. So you're kind of having to detect a whole lot of things. So when you're thinking of abstraction layers, even if you're not supporting a whole bunch of different databases, just abstracting out these oddities so that your code can run as expected really kind of gives you good benefits for the underlying. So then if someday if you have an application that maybe wants to use both the MySQLi and the MySQL driver, you automatically know I have to have an abstraction over what gets returned, so that my API that gets returned is always a consistent value. There's no sort of ambiguities of what's going on. So our code base internally, so we have basically 3 products that come out of our code base. We have a professional and an enterprise edition, and we also have a community edition. The professional enterprise under commercial license, but everybody gets the source code. And the community edition is under the AGPL v3. Everything gets built from one code base. So it's a little bit of a challenge because all of the codes kind of intermix with each other, and it's very shared. I mean, if you compare the enterprise edition with the community edition, it's about 80% community edition is the enterprise. So it's just really kind of a small delta, but the only problem is that small delta is kind of all over the place. So we use this tagging system with PHP that we run all of our code through, and then it produces out all of the different distributions, for each channel. So it'll produce an enterprise, a pro, and a CE build. And the nice thing about it with the tagging thing is that we can actually use it as a way as when we're testing out features, we can actually tag things in and tag things out really easily. So if we're looking at adding a feature but maybe not ready quite for prime time as we kind of get down towards a code freeze date, we can just say, well, the feature we want to keep in there because we're going to work on it, but we just kind of want to rip it out of the product for now. We can just tag it out and continue on with life. So it's really kind of nice that way. And each developer can run builds locally, so it's really nice. So that's really kind of all about the code, writing the portable code half of it. So customization and configuration. How many people, so like if you go download like an open source project, like I always find the biggest challenges sometimes is just getting up and running with it, right? I mean, you're kind of hunting around through config files to try to figure things out, to get things set up. I mean, lately it's kind of been more of a focus for a lot of pieces of software that, to have that user experience getting going, first thing much, faster. I was having a discussion, I think, with somebody the other night, and we were talking kind of about, Postgres and MySQL, they were kind of both kind of coming into their own at about the same time back in the day. But MySQL really kind of gained that huge user momentum where Postgres, it did, but only kind of in certain circles. And I kind of often hypothesize that the big reason why is because MySQL was so dirt simple to get started by anybody. I mean, it was a binary, you installed it, there was like little to no configuration, you could be up and running with a database in no time. Where Postgres, there was a lot more work involved. So you can't really underestimate the power of not giving as much configuration and ability to things, and also just making it simple. So so with us we have like 2 classes of people we have to pay attention to. One's for our end users. And and the thing with them is, like, end users aren't really techie. They're not very, they're not really adept for kind of like beating around and trying to, figure things out. They're not going to, like, look through all sorts of things, but they want a lot of power at their end to do things. We find with like CRM deployments, the number one reason why they fail, and this probably extends to other applications as well, but for us, we find it as a really interesting figure. The number one reasons why a enterprise CRM or any CRM deployment fails is because of user adoption. Users just don't buy into it. It might have every technical advantage in the world. It might have all sorts of good stuff going on, but from a user adoption standpoint, the users hate it. And if the users hate it, it won't gain traction, and you'll get people that won't like it. So we try to. So our goal, and one of the things we've been really trying to push, at least over the last year or two, is making things simple that are simple, worrying about the user experience, and making things configurable for the user so they feel empowered by their application, as kind of more of like a slave to it. And the same has to kind of go for developers too. So you need to make it. So one of the big things that always would drive me nuts with a piece of software is I would download, a piece of software, open source, whatnot, and let's say I needed to make a change to it. Let's say, it did 90% right, but I need to make some customizations to it and change a few things. The problem is, if I ever want to upgrade that, so let's say there's new features that come out. Let's say there's security problems. Let's say just even support. They're just not supporting it anymore. I'm stuck back there. I don't really have a good upgrade path of where to go a lot of times. So paying attention to giving developers a guide of how to make customizations to the application, giving them an API and giving them documentation of where to go with it is so crucial. And just giving them those easy hooks to say, if you want to do X, this is where you can go do it. We've created this space specifically for you, that this is a safe area that you can make any adjustments, any changes, any hooks, any whatever you need to it. And this is where you can go. And it really kind of enables, and it enables developers to do more with the platform and more with your application as a process. So the next kind of topic is testing, and testing is hard, right? Testing is a pain in the butt. I'm a developer kind of more by trade, and the one thing I hate to do more than anything is test my own code, and I'm just really bad at it. I'll just like write code, and it's like I'll do a little bit, but I just hate to test it. And I imagine how many developers here hate to test their own code as well? Yeah, it sucks. It's painful, and at worst you don't want to see yourself fail in front of you. But it's tough, and not just having a developer test their own, but having people's different eyes on it, and being able to make sure you're not repeating problems over and over and over again, and maintaining that quality. And when you're starting when you're starting off with a project, it's small, it's fairly compact. You have a couple scripts, not a whole lot going on. It's relatively easy to test. Then you add a couple more components to it here and there, and all of a sudden you have a big, behemoth of an application. And it gets to the point where you can't make a modification without something breaking, or the fear of something breaking. And that's assuming you designed it right from the get-go. I mean, imagine if it was more procedural, or it was just kind of hacked together. You can run into all sorts of nightmares with it. So it's really important when you're developing an application is to think about the testability and the quality assurance of it. Because people will evaluate you on that. If you get on a piece of software and it's buggy, you're just not going to use it, right? It doesn't meet your expectations. You're just not going to use it. So there's two ways to evaluate it, and they're kind of for two different purposes. So one, we have automated testing tools. And we use Jenkins, which is the CI server formerly known as Hudson. I don't know if everybody knows the whole background story on that, but I won't go into that for this discussion. CI is called continuous integration, for those who are not familiar with the term. And basically, what it is, it's a tool that can constantly be going in there and running tests, builds, and everything on your code base through time. And you can configure it a number of different ways. We have it configured through either every check-in. So every time we check code into our code repository, it will pull the code out. It'll run PHP-lint, which PHP-lint basically goes through and validates that the syntax is correct. You have no syntactical errors. And you surprisingly actually catch a lot of stuff right off the bat with that. And then we have PHP unit, which is unit testing. How many people are very familiar with unit testing? Nice. How many people use unit testing in your projects? Good. Good. It's actually more disappointing the people that don't, but I won't hammer on that now. Having good unit tests and having this in place enables you to safely work on your application. It allows you to safely refactor code without fear of things breaking underneath and without fear of maybe causing a bug regression. So we have like a policy internally where as we write new code, we write new components that we write unit tests to cover them, and then as we fix bugs, we also write unit tests. So that way that once we fix a bug, we know that bug is fixed forever. And if for whatever reason that bug would resurface back again, the unit test would pop up and tell us right away, so that would never happen again. We don't have to worry about a bug regressing on us. We can squash it for once and for all. But it also allows us to make a lot more riskier changes to our code base without fear of things breaking. So for example, we use NewSoap for PHP to kind of manage our web services. And we actually upgraded our NewSoap version during a patch release, which is very unheard of before that. But now that we have such good unit tests in place, we're able to do it safely and without even worrying that we were going to break anything, because we have such good unit tests that everything's working. So we run that. So we run that on every check-in, and then once a day we've developed some open source tools, and you can see the URL developers.sugarcrm.com about some of the open source tools we've developed for more of our functional testing side. So one of them is called Soda, which builds upon a testing framework called Waiter. Waiter is stands for Web Application Testing in Ruby. Basically, we thought it would be easier to write tests in XML than Ruby, so we developed kind of a language that sits on top of it. And then we're also in the process of building a GUI tool for doing that as well.